Welcome back to another episode of Relatively Damaged Live. My name is Angela, and this is
Kat.
live shows are currently streamed on Mondays to Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook. Remember to follow and subscribe. And hey, why not invite your friends? On the Monday segment of our show, Kat and I discuss topics we find interesting for about 30 minutes. So today's topic: is it possible to be completely vulnerable and safe at the same time? Whew. That
Let's
could,
make a disclaimer first. This
yeah.
is a taped show, just in case we need to fill in. We usually like to be on live, but it's not always possible. So we're taping this one today.
Yes, thank you for catching that, Cat, because I totally forgot to say that part. That's why we're a team.
That's right. Okay,
But
you are going, so let's dive in.
I was just thinking, I think anyone who's ever had trauma in their life on could being vulnerable and safe, this would be a scary even thought to have, or maybe even a thought that wouldn't be what's the even I wouldn't even think about it. They might not even think about being vulnerable and safe because it wasn't possible before. Or maybe they had been safe where they in a place where they could be vulnerable and trauma happens, and now just even thinking about it is just off the table.
I would agree with that. I mean, typically what happens with trauma is you're in this constant state of fight or flight. Be it a physical reaction or an emotional reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so yes, it is even possible. It is very difficult to imagine that kind of state.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting. So how if you experience trauma, how do you get to that place
Right.
of
I
vulnerability?
I would think slowly.
I would, and I think a lot of it is finding that right environment.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, because becoming vulnerable, if you're still in that environment, it still would not be helpful. If you're in an emotionally abusive situation and becoming, and let's say they're going to therapy or whatever, and then they're coming home to practice, that would not be a safe place to be vulnerable, to practice that vulnerability.
exactly. Um, so all of that being said is whether or not if obviously there are challenges if you are in that kind of trauma relationship to being vulnerable. Um, and so that leads the question. There is, I think, the answer is it is not always you're not always able to be vulnerable and safe at the same time. However, I do think that you can set yourself up to be vulnerable yet safe.
Hmm. I'm
Uh,
thinking you have some ideas on how to do that.
well, I do. So, for example, let's say somebody they you have these experts and they'll recommend if you're going through a career change, um, you do certain things, prepare certain things. So it might have an excess of funds on reserve, or if you have a supportive spouse, that they're your partner in this, and realizing that you might have to cut expenses in order to be able to facilitate for that career change. That's making that safe environment so that you can be vulnerable in making that career change, or
Hmm.
starting your own business, or something to that effect. Um, in a relationship that might be marred by trauma, it might be finding that trusted friend who can be that confidant, who will tell you if you're being gaslighted, will give you that support and that comfort. It won't turn their back upon you,
Mm-hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
help you build up that self-esteem, to help you realize the emotional abuse.
Right.
um for a woman who has been battered and needs to leave her home, being able to go to a place where there's other women who've gone through that, to be able to have that safe space where the person who's the physical abuser cannot contact you, cannot find you.
Well, and that's it. I would think in that home would be the place where they would be able to be vulnerable, share the struggle they went through, and they're in a safe place.
Exactly.
And I think
Yeah.
can they though in that moment feel safe, right? Like I think that would be tricky.
Right. And it is a process. So for somebody who has come from a healthy environment and had supportive parents and who allowed them to try things and to fail,
Mm-hmm.
but not make it, well, you failed, so you're a horrible human being, you're worthless, to say, okay, well, maybe, let's get up and try again. How do children learn to walk? They fall down, they get up and do it again. It's a natural thing, because we don't, oh, you failed, you should crawl forever. I mean,
they don't
no,
they don't have an opinion about it yet.
right, and they, so you encourage them to do that. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's also okay to, if you're raised in that kind of environment, it's also okay that, well, not everybody's good at everything.
Right.
you know uh you may be a wonderful musician and I couldn't play a note, you
Mm-hmm.
know and I tried, and that's okay.
Right. But it would be really different if you you had a parent or a guardian who or caretaker, whatever you want to call them, who
Hmm.
took care of you and did give you that negative feedback. And then later on in life, it's like having that calling and feeling like, oh, I need to go play this music, or I need to, I want to go learn. Then it would be really difficult to learn to 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 even perform in front of other people,
Right.
even the teacher. Now I've got to
Yes.
know who's got the who's given us the 2 cents barking today, huh?
Well, I've got the quotes here. So
No. I
there's
was asking which dog is talking to us today.
oh, you could hear, that's Boomer.
Hi, Boomer. We love Boomer. Boomer's adorable.
Yeah.
We'll have to bring pictures one of these days of our dogs and like put them on the screen just to be like, hey, these are the dogs.
Yes.
Anyway,
Your
maybe
chatter of
we'll see.
chihuahuas. I didn't know if you could hear Boomer or not.
Oh yeah.
So yeah.
But we do have
Um,
a cat. It came prepared with quotes today, so I want to hear
yes.
these.
So, okay, here's one. Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up when you can't control the outcome.
Ooh, yeah.
So if what we're doing is here, we can't control the outcome. We can't control if Boomer decides she's going to cry. We
Or
had
if
some,
my dogs start barking, we can't control
right.
that either.
We've had goofy technical difficulties uh, when trying to do this. Um, and sometimes we've had differences of opinion,
Mm-hmm.
and we come in here and we can't control this outcome.
Right.
Because if I could, I would stand up on my soapbox and just talk about what I think everybody should know, and get that off. But it makes it less fun.
Right. Right.
um but we can't control the outcome. And I think that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to have the experience, be vulnerable and have that experience. I mean, there have been
Mm-hmm.
times where there have been tears on here
Yeah.
when talking about certain things. And that's about that vulnerability. But we've created this safe space
Mm-hmm.
that we can come in here and do this and talk about things that interest us.
Well, between us, right? Because we still
Right.
don't know who's going to watch it online, and we certainly could get some trolls.
We could.
We could. In fact, I think though at that point maybe it would be interesting to see what they had to say because um yeah, they would have an opinion.
Well, we're not going there again.
I don't know why that came to me, but cuz sometimes like trolls I think they say really mean things, but if I come from the premise of it's more about them than it is about me, then does what they're saying really have any power over me? I don't know. It will be interesting to get to practice when and if we get trolls, which I think it's more of when than if, but
Right. Well, that's the thing, is that we've created this safe environment
between
for
us.
us, between us, and we know where we stand. We feel that we can be vulnerable enough to be. I mean, I feel like I'm being pretty authentic, and I think you are
Yeah.
too. The authenticity shows. If we had to be guarded and watch what we said and made sure we were playing to an audience,
That would just
then
be
we
boring.
and we wouldn't be vulnerable. It would be
Yeah.
stressful. It wouldn't be enjoyable. There's that sweet spot in having that safe space, that safe environment,
Hmm.
and being able to go and to do that. Or if you have a very personal issue that you need to sit down and talk to somebody about, being able to find the right person to talk to it about. That's you creating that safe space to be vulnerable.
I'm thinking just from what we're talking about, and it just hit me that being vulnerable takes courage, and it doesn't matter in well, as an adult in many situations, like I think as a child or as children, we do it automatically because we are vulnerable. And then as an adult, maybe it becomes a choice.
Yes, and I'm looking up more quotes as we have this, because I knew I saw one in particular on vulnerability.
Yeah.
So I am
It's just, and
here.
did you find it?
Well, here's one about courage. So courage gives us a voice, and compassion gives us an ear. Without both, there is no opportunity for empathy and connection.
Right.
And really, what is vulnerability? It's making a connection. Everything we've talked about is about making a connection to someone else,
Right.
being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Um, and so it is. I think that's really the key right there. Is yes, you have to have the courage, but you also have to have some discernment
Mm-hmm.
about when is it okay to be vulnerable. Because if you're vulnerable with the wrong person, take for example the abusive relationship.
Right.
If that relationship is abusive, that person is going to take advantage of that vulnerability and use it against you.
Well, and I think they say like psychopaths they can see it somehow. Yeah, I don't know how, but they sure pick some vulnerable women and men because I think while there are less female psychopaths, I believe there are still both. Um,
Yes.
so I don't want to be, oh my gosh, women need to protect themselves when I really do believe we all need to protect ourselves and equal opportunity. I
You
yeah.
know, I agree with you 100% on that. And it's that, a lot of a lot of life is knowing what to do and when to do it. And
Yeah.
so to be vulnerable to do that. But here's another quote on vulnerability, and I think it's going to take it in a little different direction.
Yeah. Please.
Vulnerability is the birthplace of love, belonging, joy, courage, empathy, and creativity. It is the source of hope, empathy, accountability, and authenticity.
Mm, yeah. And I know it said courage in there,
Yes.
and love, and a big part of me is thinking how important courage is in being vulnerable, but being vulnerable also, if I'm not being authentic, I can't be vulnerable. And if I'm not being vulnerable, that authenticity also doesn't show through. It doesn't, it just, then it was funny. I was reading a story. It was a little bit, I think it was about, oh, hold on. I think it's right here on my phone. Just a minute. Let me see if I can grab it real quick. Um, oops, sorry. I know we're having a lot. I'm having a lot of quiet time today. Um, so you know, and when you so the paragraph starts, and this is from the Tao of Pooh. And when you try too hard, it doesn't work. Try grabbing something quickly and precisely with a tensed up arm, then relax and try again. Try doing something with a tense mind. The surest way to become tense, awkward, and confused is to develop a mind that tries too hard, one that thinks too much. And I think that can also relate to vulnerability. If I'm thinking too much about it, if I'm not just being, then vulnerability can't happen. Is
Right.
that right?
I,
Right.
I think a lot of times when we overthink things, we are trying to force an outcome or force a solution.
Oh, yeah. Like
Uh,
make it happen.
yes, I'm going to make it happen. And there is something about, it's in I was reading that earlier because you had posted that, and it was finding that balance.
Mm-hmm.
So the balance to be vulnerable, to say, I don't know how this is going to work. I'm just going to try it. I'm going to experience it, rather than to say, I'm going to do it this way.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll give an example. There's an Irish frame drum called the bowring. And I actually had done a paper on it, but I was trying to figure out how to play it. And I'm watching YouTube videos, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to get this. And, watching how to hold the stick and how to hold the drum the right way. And I just didn't get it because I was trying to force the understanding.
Mm.
And when I kind of just let go and just started playing with it, it came to me. Now, by
Hmm.
any chance, it means I have not mastered it, but it was the letting go of being in the vulnerable place. Like I was trying to force, I'm going to learn how to play this drum,
Mm-hmm.
and letting go. And I wasn't enjoying it when I was trying to force it.
Right.
But when I just let go and said, okay, I'm not going to invest in the outcome. I'm just going to play with it. And the true playing is
Mm.
what came out.
And in that moment, you're vulnerable because you're not forcing it. And so vulnerable to whatever will happen. Maybe it will sound good. Maybe it will not sound good. You've done all the research, you read all the books, but at some point, the experience had to, knowledge wasn't helpful for the experience.
Exactly. Um, the here's a kind of another vulnerable aspect of it, is saying, I don't know.
Mm. living in the I don't know world is so, at first, very hard, I think. And then it's like, why did I not do this before? Because it is so much more fun. It's like I get to walk around and be surprised. Don't kid yourself, or I won't kid myself actually. Um, I still sometimes forget to stay in the I don't know world and become certain of how things are going to turn out. But gosh, when I'm there, like when you said that, I'm like, oh, yeah, I love this I don't know world allows God or a higher power, the universe, whatever anyone believes in, I think to for it to just be.
Yeah. And here's just this concept, and it kind of came to me before, that play,
Yeah,
whether
then you
you're
can
playing,
play.
right, whether you're playing with an idea or a process or a game or an instrument, what is gonna make it fun. I mean, I have big dogs, and
Yes.
your little dogs, they don't behave, you can pick them up. I can't do that with my dogs. I have to figure out how to compel them to behave like responsible dogs should.
Right.
Um, and so it requires a lot more patience and thought, because I have to say, okay, how am I going to get this to be fun for me, fun for the dogs, but get them to reinforce good behaviors.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I could read all the dog training books, and this one says this and this one says that. But the truth of the matter is, every dog is an individual. You've got to
Yeah.
try different things. What works for one dog may not work for another.
Same with kids. And like having fun having that playful way of being actually helps in dog training and parenting, right? Like,
Right.
and being willing to come from that I don't know perspective, which again is being very vulnerable. I think from a parenting perspective with kids, if I'm going to sit in that I don't know world and be vulnerable with the kids and share something, who knows? I don't know. I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now, but share something with them, then that, they can do with it what they want, but it doesn't stop me from being vulnerable. And when I'm vulnerable, they sense it. There is something they sense. I don't know if it's like the emotional or spiritual heart. Um, I don't know, but people know. People know if we're being real with them.
You- this is so funny. I remember coming home from school, and my mother was crying on the sofa, and my cousin had passed away, and she was only a few years older than me. So I was in I don't I think I was in I think I was still in grammar school,
Hmm.
and the that my mom could be, she didn't try to cover it up and hide it. She didn't try to pretend. She was vulnerable in that moment with something that was very hard and very sad. And we were able to sit together in that sadness. So the vulnerability can come in times of sadness or times of difficulty, but it can also come in times of joy, or
Mm-hmm.
just the everyday.
Yeah.
Um, Vulnerability has this spectrum, just like life has this spectrum of being vulnerable in different places in different situations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but again, it kind of still takes me back to that. What is the right place in the right time and with the right person?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. because I sure have I jokingly call I have sticky notes that God puts places to remind me that I didn't go down the right path, or the path that was niggling at my heart at the time. Um, but I think I get sticky notes too when I'm vulnerable with people, and I think I even sense it ahead of time, and then I go, anyway. But you know, um, and I do it anyway. I think is what I was trying to say. I know all the words
Mm,
didn't come out, and then I pay a price. So I think that's something else for someone who's been through any trauma, right? Like knowing that it's going to be touch and go for a little bit. It's still learning about
right.
what it means and where that can happen, that it is safe, and what kind of person. There are some great books out there. I think Safe People is one of them,
Mm,
that helps point out what that might look like. What is a safe person? And it's with those safe people that we get to be vulnerable. And it is still awkward and weird at first. I think for anyone who's experienced any sort of trauma in their life, which is probably everyone. I think
to varying
everyone has,
degrees.
yeah, I think that everyone has had some form or another. And the definition of trauma, the definition of trauma is really how one experiences it, right? So if it's traumatic to someone else, I don't get to tell them no, it's not traumatic. If
Right.
they experience it as a trauma, then it is in fact a trauma and needs to be worked with as such, and that's okay. I mean, I remember at the beginning of starting the podcast, of saying, hey, inside, I was like, I don't want to, I can't decide what is someone else's trauma, whether,
Mm,
or, if they put something on the form, is that a trauma or is that not a trauma? I couldn't do it. So I really accepted everyone. And the one thing that I thought was fascinating that I learned, that these things that I thought might not be traumas, that I actually did question, were absolutely traumas, the way those people
mm.
experienced it. And I think that's something important to point out.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, because a lot of it is really our perceptions.
Or just
You
how we
know,
experienced it. And I don't know that we'll ever know exactly why someone experiences one thing as a trauma that someone else doesn't. Like, I don't know that we'll ever have that answer. But I certainly appreciate coming that I can now really have compassion and love for every single person, and acknowledge that that pain is real for them.
I'm laughing because it reminds me of this story about the trauma. I think I've told you my coffee trauma story.
Maybe.
Have I?
I don't
Maybe
I don't
about
know.
my cousin who gave me the cold black coffee.
No, I don't remember
No.
this.
Oh my goodness. Okay, real quick. When I was a kid, we were at a party, and I asked my aunt for Coke. And my older cousin, her son, she told him to get me some Coke. Well, he instead gave me cold black coffee. And now I hate coffee. I hate coffee ice cream. I hate coffee candy. I hate coffee. I call that my coffee trauma. And people
Rightfully
told me
so.
that, and people have told me, oh, that's just ridiculous. Get over it. I was traumatized by that experience, and so I can't enjoy coffee. Um,
Yeah.
and
Well,
and
and that
it's
just
it's
it
a
goes
it's a stupid example. No, it's not really stupid. It's a,
no.
it's a small example, but it goes to show how I experienced that
I think it's
caused that.
a very real example of exactly what we're talking about when we mean trauma. Trauma is not something I get to define. Clearly, it was something that impacted you, this cold black coffee, and we get to hold space for the cold black coffee trauma. And because it's real, you know, and and there may never be a point in time. where you feel safe or vulnerable enough to work through the cold black coffee trauma. And that's okay. It's not impacting your life, but there are many traumas that do impact day-to-day living that require working through. And I think that takes a significant, to work through a trauma takes a significant amount of vulnerability, courage, and it takes a special someone to create a safe place where that can be done.
Beautiful.
Oh, you're so sweet. Is that where we're at the end of our time anyway? So
We are.
are we good? Shall we end on that?
I think you said that beautifully, and I couldn't have said any better. So, yes, I think
Awesome.
that's all for this
episode. Well, guys, there's also, as you know, a Relatively Damaged podcast where I interview amazing guests like we just talked about that have overcome struggle or trauma in their lives and how they found hope and healing, how they worked through it. You can find it Spotify, Apple, pretty much anywhere you listen to podcasts. I'm Angela, and this is
Kat.
we'll
See you next time.
week.